I want to thank everyone for being here this morning. It's a really important issue. As everyone knows, public sector unions, particularly our union, the Carmen's union, has been under attack for many, many years. We just got to look back to the 2015 budget, 16 budget with the relaxation of the Taxpayer Protection Act to show the attacks that we endured. I can tell you that this executive board and this membership is leading the effort to make sure that the Taxpayer Protection Act gets reinstated in July. It's one of the goals of this board, and we're working hard to make sure that that happens. But this Janis Supreme Court case, this attacks the existence of unions in public sector throughout the country. Doesn't matter if you're a policeman, a fireman, a teacher, ASPE, SEIU. This is attacking the whole country, every public sector employee. We can't let that happen. We have plenty of work to do going forward, and we will do the work, and we will survive this, and we will be stronger. But we need everybody's help in here. This union, this isn't Jimmy O'Brien's union or the executive board's union. This is your union. Every member in here today, and every member who could not be here today. If we let this fall apart, shame on us. You want good health care. You want pensions. You want good wages, good benefits. This attack wants to eliminate all that. And we're not going to let it happen. And without any further comments, I'm going to introduce Ben Gordon from the ATU, who was here at last month's union meeting, gave a short presentation on the Janice right to work, and is here this morning.
So I get a sense of the room. How many of you were here on March 20th and saw some of this? So maybe about a third to half of the room. So for those of you, I'm going to try to go through some of this quickly. It had not been my plan, but with enough new folks in the room, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. And so we'll try to get through this quickly. How many of you have heard of the Janis case and this right to work threat? All right, most but not everybody. Right to work. Maybe we'll consider this the exercise portion of the morning. Raise your hands if you know what right to work means. Again, maybe half the room. All right. Good. The Janis case is based on work that the National Right to Work Committee has been doing for many years in this country. In 1947, when after the Second World War ended, in the first election in 1946, the Republicans took control of Congress, and they amended the National Labor Relations Act to change what was the Wagner Act, the National Labor Relations Act, to create two kinds of states: union security states or union shop states, and right to work states. Union shop states means that it's legal, constitutional, legitimate to have a provision that says, in a contract that says, everybody has to pay dues and be a member of the union, or at least pay a fee that's similar to dues, because you get all the benefits. You're entitled to the same wages, benefits, pension. The union has to represent everyone. So because of that, you can have a provision that says everybody has to pay. Massachusetts is a union security state. New York, where I live, is a union security state. Illinois, where I grew up, is a union security state. Right to work state says the union still has to represent everybody if there's a union, but you don't have to pay if you don't want to. And so we find all the southern states now, and little by little over the course of the last 7-8 years, a number of other states, Wisconsin started it in 2011 when Scott Walker got elected there, and it's moved to Michigan, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky. Those were all union shop states and have become right to work states in the last few years. And there has been this legislative attack in state after state, or in some cases executive orders where people didn't even have their rights in the law. Like in Indiana, they only had the right because the governor issued an executive order, public employees that is. And in some ways that was just taken too long. To go state after state after state was taken too long for the forces that want to weaken unions. And they figured places like Illinois and Massachusetts and New York and California, New Jersey, it was going to be way too long. And so they have taken a shortcut, and this Janis case is that shortcut. In Illinois, Mark Janis is a social services worker in the state of Illinois who says, I don't want to pay dues and I don't want to pay agency fees or fair share fees anymore. It's a violation of my First Amendment rights. I should be able to get the benefits, be entitled to representation, same wage structure, same health insurance, same pension plan. You got to represent me if I have a grievance or a disciplinary matter, but I don't want to pay $600, $700, $800 a year. I want to pay zero. And forcing me to pay is a violation of my First Amendment rights. Why? Simple argument. For all you public sector workers who work for government or a government agency or a state or a county or a municipality, you're bargaining with government officials, you're bargaining about the use of tax dollars and public policy, and so the argument is that that's the equivalent of political speech. Your bargaining is not like private sector bargaining, where you're bargaining with a private company. Because you're public employees and you're bargaining with public entities on the other side of the table, you are engaged in political speech, and forcing me as a member, or to be a member, or to pay is a violation because you're forcing me to engage in political speech. Maybe I don't want a higher wage or a better pension plan, or if in the case of teachers union, maybe I don't want smaller class size. I don't want to fight for tenure or rights on the job. I want lower taxes. And you're forcing me to give you money, and you're speaking for me, and I don't support that speech, so it's a violation of my First Amendment rights. That's the basic argument. It's the same as the argument 2 years ago in the Friedrichs case. And so the goal is that people can get in or out of the union when they want to and not have to pay. So how many of you know somebody who, if they didn't have to pay, might not? You know, if I went to the checkout line at the grocery store and they said, you know, your groceries total $107.43. You can pay all or none of that or any amount in between. At least sometime I'm thinking I would not pay. I wouldn't worry so much that I had my wallet with me when I went to the store if it was optional, right? That's the goal. Make it optional and encourage people to get out of the union. All right. Anybody know what this is? It's a pin from 1942. It's about dues. So this is what the packing house workers and a lot of other unions used many years ago, before the boss took dues out of people's checks. They might have still had pay packets back then. But before the boss would deduct dues and remit them to the union, this was how people paid their dues and signaled to their co-workers that they had paid. So it's pink. Why? What was that? Or it could have been yellow. But why is there a color to it? Show your current, right? The previous month it was probably yellow, was green before that, blue before that. And so this is April of 1942. If you're still walking around with the March button that was blue, your co-workers, everybody knew you were not current. So this is how you paid your dues, essentially bought your pin and stayed current. This is the sort of voluntary, got to do it on our own system that we're moving back to with this case. So the Janis case is not here by chance. we really face a serious challenge in this country about what kind of a country we're going to be. We think of ourselves as a democracy, and this case is just one of many threats that regular people, working people, face about what kind of a country we're going to live in. Are we going to continue to have some semblance of democracy where regular people have a say in this society, or is it going to be an oligarchy, essentially where the wealthiest few get to make the decisions for everybody else? So some of this cast of characters, and I won't belabor it. The most important ones are there up on your screen. Charles and David Koch, family's worth a little more than $90 billion. That's all. They've made their money in chemicals and petroleum and plastics and now all sorts of other industries. On any given day, I'm sure you either blow your nose into a product they've created, or when you turn your lights on, it's because there's a power plant somewhere that they own. They have committed, in 2016, they committed to spend, with a group of 400 friends, over $900 million on the elections. This non-presidential year, they've committed to over $400 million to influence elections this fall. They are aggressively, seriously anti-union. This is just a picture of a web of organizations, think tanks, PR firms, universities, judges, politicians that are a part of their web, people they give money to and work with. They have fought gas tax hikes, they've fought public transit, they've all over the country. They spend a lot of time in Colorado, but they play all over the country. They fought Obamacare. They were active last fall in the elections in New Jersey and Virginia, although they didn't come out the way they would have liked. They've been behind many of the attacks on union rights in Illinois. This case is an Illinois case. They were big supporters of the governor who got elected in Illinois. The first thing he did was stop turning over fair share fees to the unions. They're not the only ones. This is Betsy DeVos. She's your Secretary of Education. I spend a lot of time in Michigan. She's from Michigan. She's the wife of an heir to the Amway fortune. She had done a lot of work messing up education in Michigan, so with that credential, she became our Secretary of Education. And in Michigan, they're a little conflicted about it. They think she's a terrible Secretary of Education, and they think, you talk to the union folks there, and they can't wrap their minds around the fact that she's now the Secretary of Education, one of the highest unionized professions, teaching, and that she's gotten this job. On the other hand, they're really glad she's out of their state. This guy, John Arnold, quite the character. Enron executive. People remember Enron some years ago. He's a very interesting fellow, spends a lot of money fighting unions, supporting right to work, and his big claim to fame, other than helping tank Enron and sinking all sorts of pension plans and costing retirees billions of dollars when that company went under, he then, after helping lead Enron into the ground through all these off-the-books partnerships and all this scandal, he then gives millions of dollars to the Pew Charitable Trust to fund research on how public pensions need to be terminated because they've lost so much money and they can't meet their obligations. So there's a certain irony to the guy who helped devastate all these public pension funds now saying, hey, look, these public pension funds are in terrible shape. We got to get rid of them. You got to go to 401ks and get rid of these defined benefit plans. They're part of a whole network of organizations. Up in the upper left-hand corner there is the National Right to Work Committee. They're the ones who've taken this Janis case. They're the lawyers for Janis. We've seen a trend. A few years ago, if we'd had this presentation, all these states would have been, in West Virginia, would have been gray, union security states. Right to work has grown from 22 to 28 states. You can see the trend has been bad. No states have gone from right to work to union security, union friendly, in the last decade, but several have gone the other direction. This is, you don't need to worry about the fine print. Suffice it to say that this is a series of court cases that unions have faced on this issue of whether people have to pay and what rights they have. This first one at the top, Abood versus the Detroit Board of Education from 1977, 41 years ago, said that fair share fees requiring everybody to pay because they're enjoying the benefits of the contract is constitutional. It was a 9-0 decision, and all the Democratic appointees and all the Republican appointees on that court said fair share fees are constitutional. Every other case up there is a step back from that. We've had 40 years of moving backwards on this question. Yes, you can have everybody pay, but they don't have to pay for the union's political activity. And yes, they have to pay, but they don't have to pay for the union's organizing activity. And you have to notify them ahead of time, and you can't take their money until they've signed, and you can't give them a rebate for the political portion of the dues. You have to not collect it in the first place. So case after case has been stepping back in terms of the rights of union members. This last one, Harris v. Quinn, I dealt with personally. That case, funny enough, also another Illinois case, came out in 2014 that said home care workers and child care providers who are not traditional employees but really independent providers cannot have fair share fees, can't have a union shop essentially. Not everybody has to pay, even though they still all enjoy the benefits. We had organized some years in my old union 25,000 child care providers, and this was a real blow to our organization there. So I've dealt with this personally. There's case after case after case lined up around the country like airplanes on the runway out at Logan. And if it weren't this Illinois case with Janice, there are cases in Massachusetts, there are cases in New York, and all over the country where they're trying to do this. This one just got to the top of the pile at the Supreme Court the quickest. So they weren't taking any chances. In every union shop state, they found somebody who would file the lawsuit to try to get this to the Supreme Court as fast as possible and overturn that Abood case from 1977. So what does it mean? Janis versus AFSCME is technically the name of the case. The goal is to abolish fair share in the public sector. So you can't require everyone to pay. They can still enjoy the benefits of the contract and the right of representation without paying. This case involves the public sector. They'll come after the private sector next. It would mean that the union or the employer cannot deduct dues or fees without a formal written authorization, the employee's consent. So one piece of advice, make sure you got a signed authorization from everybody in your bargaining unit, right? Because without that proof, can't take the dues or fees. And here's the rub. There's no way of getting out of this. This is the Supreme Court hearing a constitutional claim. So your contract isn't going to trump this. Your state law, as good as it is in Massachusetts, isn't going to trump this. Congress can't undo it. An amendment to the U.S. Constitution could, but that takes years, if not decades. So there's no stopping this. The court heard this case on February 26th of this year, and they could issue an opinion tomorrow. Their term ends on June 30th, and we're going to get a decision before then, or by then. The last two big labor law decisions around dues came out on June 30th, where there was a significant change, in part because they're so controversial and the justices are fighting back and forth. So most people expect it in June, but it could be any time now. So as I said, it means that non-dues payers will get union representation for free. How do you feel about that? Angry? Anybody angry about that? And it means that until the law changes, you still have an obligation to represent everybody and provide the same level of service and representation regardless of membership status. So I know your union, very democratic, has a tradition and a structure that says local unions vote on what goes to arbitration, for example. You're going to have an obligation to make those, cast those votes, make those decisions as a local union, regardless of whether the member is a member, whether the worker is a member or a non-member. You get that obligation because you can only have one union in a workplace for a bargaining unit, right? In the United States, you have to show a majority to be the union, and only one union can show a majority at a time. And so because you're the exclusive representative, you have to represent everybody. There's some tinkering on the margins with that they're trying in New York and a couple other states, but as it stands, you're going to be obligated to represent everybody regardless of their membership status. So is it really going to happen? The answer is yes. This is going to happen. We know where 8 of the 9 justices stand because the Friedrichs case in 2016 was the same exact issue, and they, quote unquote, settled it 4-4. So they couldn't settle it. 4 said this is unconstitutional, and 4 said this is constitutional, so they kept the lower court ruling in place, which meant that the 1977 case still stood, so you could still have a membership or fair share requirement. So what does that mean? Well, it means that this guy, Neil Gorsuch, the newest justice, is going to decide this case. The others, now 2 cases in a row, have all declared where they stand. There's not much mystery for any of them. And for those who saw the oral argument or have seen a transcript, there's no doubt where 8 of the 9 stand. This guy, President Trump's appointee last year, is going to decide it. And that article is called Solidarity's End for a reason. This guy's no friend of labor or workers. His most famous case that came out in his confirmation was an Illinois case where he said that it was legitimate to terminate a truck driver who had left his vehicle in sub-zero temperatures in a snowstorm where the truck had broken down and gone to find safety. And the company fired this driver, and Gorsuch said that's fine. Now, the good news was that the other 2 judges in that 3-judge panel disagreed with Gorsuch, but even in that extreme circumstance where this driver's life was at stake, literally at stake, he said, nah, it's okay to fire him for that reason. So he's going to be the one to break the tie, and this is going to go bad. We're going to lose this case. Gorsuch is not going to be taking on the guys who got him there and 30-plus years of his history as a judge and finding in favor of workers and unions in this case. So I realize I'm preaching to the choir to some extent. The folks who came out here this morning are the ones who appreciate that there's a threat, or at least couldn't say no to the president. So the best course of action is prepare for losing this case, and if we don't, I'll come back and admit I was wrong about this, but we're going to lose this case, so you got to prepare. What does it mean? As I said before, it means your choice at the moment is to be a member, and I know in your local you're at 100% membership, but even if you weren't a member, under your current contract, under the current terms, you'd have to pay just about the same amount as a fair share fee. That calculation is going to change for folks after this case. They're going to be able to pay dues or pay nothing at all. So how much do you pay in a given month or year? How much? 18 a week. So the choice is not going to be between 18 a week and 16 or 17 or 15, whatever a fair share fee would be right now. It's going to be between 18 a week and 0. And we're not going to be at this alone. The other side, the Koch brothers, the Right to Work Committee, the Freedom Foundations of the world, are going to have what we call disorganizers out on the doors, making the case to you and your coworkers that you should quit this union. Here's an example of a letter from Local 587, your brothers and sisters in Seattle, that they have been passing out to ATU members with Larry Hanley's name and address, basically saying, I opt out, stop taking my money. Pre-printed, postage paid, doing you a favor. Here's a postcard from another one. This was an SEIU campaign. This Christmas, give yourself a raise. Quit your union. Buy yourself a big screen TV with the money you're going to save. Right? Here's another one. Opt out now. Opt out, save money, lose nothing. That's their slogan. You get all the same terms as those suckers who are still paying. Save your money. Opt out. The contract still applies to you. They got to represent you. They don't talk about the long term. But on day one, they're right. You can save money. They've got TV ads. This is a screenshot from a TV ad in Washington or Washington, Bellingham, Washington. So their argument is unions do nothing to protect the public, only themselves. The union bosses, the national or local level, spend our money. Unions are old-fashioned. We don't need somebody in between us and the boss. Clogs up communication. I want to be able to deal directly with my supervisor, directly with the agency. Pay nothing, keep everything. Give yourself a raise. They've got a pretty easy argument. You can start saving money right now. Prepare for this case. So they're all over the country. I do a fair bit of work in Michigan. They're on the doors. They're knocking on doors in Michigan, talking to folks. They're in Washington and Oregon. They're following opportunity, but they're going to be here when this comes down. They're going where there are big numbers of people. They put billboards outside state office buildings in New York. Mailings, phone calls, emails, web ads. They've got unlimited resources, and they're coming to encourage you and your coworkers to get out of the union. Save money, continue to get all the benefits. All right. That's the slideshow. Questions, reactions? Yes. So anything below everybody paying something is a weaker union, right? And we'll talk about that. But the gravest threat is if you don't represent a majority, right? At that point, the boss can have a good faith belief that the union doesn't any longer represent a majority, and your union and your ability to bargain is at jeopardy if you fall below 50% membership. That's the most extreme concern. This really is a challenge of we all do better when we stick together. When the original case not Case, but the original law passed in Wisconsin. I went there and I met some of my AFSCME colleagues and I talked to folks in the teachers union there. And they lost their fair share rights. They also lost some of their bargaining rights as well. But if you talk to the average public employee in Wisconsin, they are saving union dues in the cases where they got out. Some are still in the union. But in my old union, only about 25% of the members are still in the union in Wisconsin. They went from about 63,000 AFSCME members in Wisconsin in 3 different councils and dozens of different locals to about 16,000, between 15 and 16,000. And some locals went to 0. And so they just don't have a union anymore in lots of places around that state. In the bigger places, they kept more members, but in very few do they still have a majority. So what has it meant? It means that they're paying on average about $4,000 a year per person more for their pensions. Their pensions were almost entirely paid for by the employer. Now they have to make a huge contribution. They're paying a similar amount more for their health insurance. In some places they had health insurance entirely, where the premiums were entirely paid for by the employer. In some cases they were making a relatively small contribution. That's gone up by thousands. They have not seen raises. In their law, as a result of all this, their bargaining rights have been weakened. And so in Wisconsin, they can't, in the public sector, they can't even bargain raises above inflation. So in Wisconsin, or 2%, if inflation's over 2%, the cap for public employees, wage increases in a contract, is 2%. So in a lot of cases, there are no raises. They're paying more for pension, paying more for health insurance. And while they're saving a few $100 in dues, they are thousands of dollars worse off every year. So they're paying more. New employees are not going into the state defined benefit plan. They're just getting a 401k. And it means that the unions are not in the same position to defend them at the state. So in some cases they're bargained, and in some cases, like in New York, public employees are in the pension plan by statute. In all these cases, new tiers have developed where people have lesser rights, lesser pensions, and they're simply paying more. So that doesn't necessarily change immediately. The law is the law. Your state bargaining law is still your state bargaining law. So that doesn't have to change. The risk is that over time, what happens? As people get out, unions have fewer members, unions have lower resources, less money, so you don't have the lawyers, you don't have the lobbyists, you don't have as strong an organization, and you tend to see an erosion of those sorts of rights. So in Wisconsin, it is illegal for a public employer to deduct union dues to remit to a labor union. So they can't do that anymore. So to collect dues, they have to do it by hand, do it by credit cards, set it up through their bank accounts, but do it through the union, not the employer anymore. So that wouldn't change here immediately. We'd have to see over time. So they are working on that in a number of places. New York, I know. It doesn't really, a lot of what they're proposing wouldn't change anything, but it's sort of a reaffirmation. Right? It's one of the risks you have with a system where the boss deducts the dues, because they know every day what percentage you're at. Because they know how many employees, they know how many. So in the vast majority of states, it's a majority. You have to have a majority to still be the union. In Colorado, the law had been, you had to have a majority to have a union, but if you had 75% vote in an election, then that could mean everybody had to pay. That law would go away. So certain states have different triggers, but I think in Massachusetts, you need a majority. when this case comes down, instead of being able to rely on everybody having to pay and the union having the resources and solidarity because everybody's in, it's going to have to be a conscious decision for everybody to stick together. You can't control people. So this presentation for the last hour was the wake-up call. There is a lot at risk. What you have relied on is at risk. The short answer is that it's all over the map. So, as I said, in Wisconsin, there are a number of places where, when I talked to the leaders of the statewide union there, they said, we were shocked. We had local presidents quit. And the local went to zero. I have a friend there I met through some union politics some years ago named Marv Veek. He's the president of the Rock County, Wisconsin local of AFSCME, 175 folks, heavy equipment operators to office and clerks in the county building to guys who work on the roads. And they are at about 97% membership. I think they went from 175 to 170. But the vast majority are still paying dues. They did not think of the union as merely a service that they were buying. They all looked at each other and said, all right, what's going to happen here? We going to do this? We going to stick together, or are we going to save some money? So in that case, they had a whole mess of conversations. They had the kinds of small group meetings we're going to be talking about in a little bit here. And they did a sign-up campaign. And they stuck together. So they have not faced nearly the kinds of economic losses that others have. Where they lost the union, the boss just makes a decision, and in all those cases, people are paying more. Are they paying more in Rock County? Yes. The unions are weaker everywhere in Wisconsin because they lost the right to bargain over certain things. But they're much stronger than in the places where people got out. So it's really all over the map. In your union in Michigan, where they had a whole series of one-on-one conversations, and they talked to people about what's at stake. Your local president there, Fred Westbrook, they haven't lost things. They've kept high membership in the Detroit local. We cannot stop this decision. 9 justices at the Supreme Court are going to decide this. So they've had the rallies, they've filed the briefs, but this decision is coming down. And your union and all the other unions and AFSCME cannot stop that. How you react to that is what's at stake here. Will determine how you fare, how you deal with that. That's a function of state law and your card. So right now in the ATU, you have a provision that sets down the time frame when you can get in or out. Your national union is putting together new cards that narrow the window, so it's not constantly getting in and out. The goal would be to create a small window. Once you're in, you'd have to be in for a year, essentially, at least, and you'd stay in until you say, I want to get out. So that would be particular to your union and your form. Yeah.
We're uncertain how far this is going to reach with the Supreme Court decision. We're not certain if we're going to have to do an initiative to sign everyone back up to the union, or whether people are going to just drop out. So that will be determined by the Supreme Court in their decision, and we can't do really anything until that decision comes out.
Non-union folks have pensions, no doubt about it. What we see across the country is when unions get weaker, pension protections start to go away. So the likelihood of the pension plan being fully funded you're getting the same terms that you have now. You're continuing to not have to contribute or contribute a low amount. All those things are likely to change as unions get weaker. Right. I have seen really strong unions. The strongest unions I've ever seen are the ones where people are in, but they don't have to be. Right? Where they can't rely on everybody paying the way you have here. So I would take a 90% or an 85 or an 85% membership union in a right-to-work state, an open shop state, over 100% mandatory union in a union security state any day in terms of its strength and solidarity. Why? Even though there's less money, even though there are fewer members, those people all understand what's going on. They make a decision every day to stay in that union. Those leaders are doing what he's describing and what you're describing, the hard work of building power, defending their contract, defending their jobs, defending their pensions, and they can't just take it for granted. So it's a change from, I'm paying this money for a service that somebody else, Jimmy O'Brien and barn captains and officers and executive board are providing me, to we all got to do this. We can keep what we have and defend our right to bargain, but we've got to do this. We can't rely on somebody else. And I think New York, Massachusetts, California, the strongest states with the highest number and percentage of union members, this is tougher because of good laws and, generally speaking, if not good politics, better politics than all these other states. There's a certain comfort level, a sense that we don't have to worry about this. Yeah, that's Wisconsin. Michigan may be the home of the UAW, but we're going to be okay here, right? So I think you got to start where you start. This is where you start. And if you go out and have these conversations that we're going to be talking about and do these meetings and sign up your coworkers and let them know what's going on and talk about what's at stake, build the connections, you will still have a strong union. And it's got to grow. Obviously, there are 4,000 folks in the union. And there aren't 4,000 people here today. But it takes a core of folks who are going to go out and do this work. And it's very doable. And they're doing it across the country.